Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. Today we'll be exploring Agri-PV topic, and it's a very timely topic, especially as we are currently in the growing season. My name is Radmila, and I'm excited to be your host today. So I see that people are still joining us. So for now, let me start with a brief introduction to Solarplaza. We are based in Rotterdam, and we organize renewable energy conferences all over the world. We recently celebrated our 250th event, which we are very proud of, and the number only keeps growing. So this webinar is also a lead up to the Solarplaza Summit Agri-PV, which will take place on the 18th of September in Cologne. So be sure to check it out on our website and book your ticket. So before we get started, a few quick housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded, and we will share both the slides and the recordings afterwards in the email. Please feel free to submit your questions at any time through the Q&A box that is at the top right of your window. And we will do our best to address as many as we can during the Q&A segment, but in case we don't have enough time, we will email those questions as well. If you have any technical issues, you can let us know in the chat box that is located close to Q&A box, and my colleague will be there to help you. So now let's take a look at the agenda for today's webinar. I already made a webinar intro, and then I will introduce our speakers that will deliver 3 presentations to you, and in the end, we will have 10 minutes general Q&A. So without further ado, let me introduce our speakers today. The first one is Nils Kuchenbuch, and he's a co-founder at Feldwerke. So today Nils will share more about the general Agri-PV landscape. His company is currently developing the largest Agri-PV tracker project in southern Germany, 30 hectares with a capacity of 17 megawatts, and advancing a pipeline of over 20 projects with a combined potential of 250 megawatts. So if you have any questions about developing these projects, I'm sure Nils will be delighted to answer them. Then I would like to introduce our second speaker, David Lecoufle. He is an environmental engineer and a farmer from Écolieu, Lacampagne. David has prepared something really special today. He's going to take us on our virtual tour of his farm, so get ready for that. And last but not the least, we have Theresa Kärtner. She's policy advisor for renewable energy and social policy at Deutscher Bauernverband. Sorry for my pronunciation, the German Farmers Association, and she will share an overview of why Germany is an attractive market for investors, as well as the key legislations and incentives currently in place. So it looks like we have a very insightful and rich session today. So I'm going to hand it over to Nils to tell us what is happening in the Agri-PV world. And yeah, Nils, the floor is yours.
Hi, so a little bit maybe about myself and about Feldwerke before we get started. So my name is Nils. Thank you for the short intro. I'm one of the founders of Feldwerke. We are a quite young developer of Agri-PV projects. We are based in Munich. We're now 1.5 years old. And yeah, we are about in July, so in a few weeks, we will start the construction of our first Agri-PV plant. So yeah, are really progressing quite well. Today I brought you some slides. Let me just skip to the next one, which is not working. Now I skipped 2. Wait, sorry. So can you just help me again and go on our first slide, because I'm troubled really navigating through our slides.
No problem. Is the current slide correct one?
No, I think that should be the second one. Or then, no, it's the first one. Yeah, no, true. Yeah, it's the first one. Yeah. So the first slide that I brought is I want to make a short comparison for Germany, how a ground-mounted PV or a conventional PV plant differs from an Agri-PV plant. So first of all, farming obviously not doable on a ground-mounted PV plant. On an Agri-PV plant, at least 85% of their space still is farmable, so still in agricultural production. Then in Germany, the farmers get some sort of subsidy, or this is a European subsidy scheme for farmers. Also, if you opt for a ground-mounted PV, you don't get that subsidy at all. Whereas for an Agri-PV plant, you get at least 85% of your prior subsidies. Also, when you have this Agri-PV plant on your farm. Then also quite important in Germany, when you lease your land to a developer who is building a ground-mounted PV plant on it, this field is not in your we have something called like a farming assets, operating farming assets. It's not in there anymore. So if you want to give that field to your son or your daughter, at some point you have to pay a lot higher taxation than if you do when you give your agri-PV plant to your son or daughter. So basically nothing changes from a taxation point of view if you build an agri-PV plant. Permitting really dependent on the size on agri-PV. I don't want to go too much into that, but in both cases, in the ground-mounted PV plant, permitting lasts at least usually 2 to 3 years. For an agri-PV plant, if it's a small one, if it's below 2.5 hectares, it can go really fast, up to a few weeks. If it's a large plant, it usually also takes at least a year or something. We managed to get permit for our first plant within half a year. So it is dependent on the size of the Agri-PV plant, but usually it goes a lot faster than for a ground-mounted PV plant. Then the production profile really dependent on the Agri-PV technology that we choose. But in southern Germany, you usually get full load hours of around 1,000, 1,100 for a ground-mounted PV plant. If you build, for example, trackers, which is what we are doing with our Agri-PV plant, you can get up to 1,400 full load hours, depending where you are. But usually you have around 20 to 30% more full load hours than a conventional ground-mounted PV plant. And the EEG subsidy, so for a ground-mounted PV plant, you only get these in certain areas. For example, if you're close to a highway, or if you in a agricultural bad location. For agri-PV plants, you get it no matter where you are. You always get an EEG subsidy. So there are a lot of really good advantages for farmers to opt for an agri-PV plant instead of a ground-mounted PV plant. Maybe to conclude this slide, you obviously have a double usage of your farming area. This leads to a diversification of income streams. You still get the incomes of your farming, and you also get your income through electricity sales or land lease, whatever you offer. If you lease your land to a developer like us, you get leasing payments. If you obviously build it on your own land, you get revenues from the sale of electricity. You have financial advantages in terms of income. Obviously, it's a double usage, and also in terms of taxation, you have ecological advantages because you really extensify the land a little, so that will help you to really gain ecological advantages. And lastly, you contribute to the energy transition, I think, in the best way that you can do. I think ground-mounted PV has a lot of disadvantages. Wind energy has, some people say, a lot of disadvantages. And agri-PV for us, I think it's like the best of both worlds. So yeah, one can really be proud to have an agri-PV plant on his land. This was kind of a general quick overview around Agri-PV. Maybe let's dig deeper into the technologies the main technologies that you can build. So on one hand, on the left hand, we see the conventional. We call it conventional Agri-PV because if you talk to people and you tell you're building Agri-PV, most people think about what you see on the picture here on the left. I think the farming, we only have given it 2 stars out of 5 because farming really works, but it's very dependent on the crops you have there. It works for permanent and for special crops, but obviously, as you can see, the construction, arable farming or something like this does not work with this kind of Agri-PV technology. Income is also, we only gave it 1 star because the construction is quite expensive. As you can see here, we have a lot of steel, and yeah, this is pretty much the elevated crop PV. I think a really interesting solution. It's really good for permanent and special crops. But if you look at the German agricultural landscape, I think we only have 1 to 2% of our land is used for permanent and special crops. So it's a really good solution, but it doesn't fit for most of our land. That's why we are only developing plants with the technologies on the right. I will dig deeper into trackers, so I will go first with the elevated cow PV. It's usually quite, it's from the scheme quite similar to the elevated crop PV. Usually you just build conventional PV plants, but in a height of at least 2.1 meters, and you also leave a little bit more space in between the rows, so that you have a lot of, or still some solar radiation for the farming area below, but also you have a lot, with a height of at least 2.1 meters, you have enough height to have your cows grazing beneath. So farming also quite, you can only use it for pasture farming. Still, again, it's not the majority of German farmland. I think it works financially really well because construction is not that expensive, especially compared to ground-mounted PV plant. So there's quite some good business case without subsidies with this kind of cow PV. Shadowing also not as well because you have non-transparent modules. So quite some shadowing, but still works for the cows below. Also, the shadowing is somehow good for the cows. Usually, if you see those plants, you see the cows standing below those modules because they rather stand in the shadow than in the sun. So shadowing is in this case also quite well for the cows. But we will be focusing on what we are mainly, pretty much 90% of the plants we are developing are trackers, which is, I think, the best solution for arable farming and also for grassland, and also has the best or the most attractive electricity generation. So maybe if we want to dig deeper into trackers, I brought another slide. So what we are doing, we are building tracker rows from north to south, usually in distances in between of around 14 meters. We have usually in Germany most agricultural machinery has lengths or wide width of 6 meters. So then farmers opt for having 2 agricultural rows or farming rows that adds up to 12 meters. Then we leave another meter left and another meter right, just just so that farming is more comfortable. And then this adds up to a 14-meter row distance. We then build that up from north to south, and having two modules on top of it. Those trackers, they are called trackers because they are able to move. So that's why we're building from north to south, so that we can track the sun as it is rising in the east and setting in the west. So pretty much what we're doing is tracking the sun all day long. Those trackers have a height of, or an axis height of, almost 3 meters, which is advantageous because farmers can then either they farm next to the plants or also below. Usually, most farming equipment is I mean, the tractors are higher than 3 meters usually, but the stuff that they're pushing around or carrying behind them, sorry for my English, are below 3 meters. So this works quite well. They are able to move those trackers on their own. So usually, if they're not on the land, the trackers move as the sun moves. But if they want to work on this area, they can do it with an app and track those trackers and then just move them to the side, so they can really well work next or below those trackers. What I was saying, we have 1 meter to left or 1 meter right, adds up to 2 meters. We call it biodiversity strip. It has 2 advantages. First of all, obviously farming is just more comfortable if you have some space between the steel of the substructure and where you are working. And the second advantage is that you can use this space really well for the biodiversity of the land. So this adds up that we usually have around 90% of the area which is still able for farming. 8% of the land is for the biodiversity strip, and usually 1 to 2% actually gets lost because of the substructure. One of the largest advantages from an electricity point of view is that through the tracking we gain a really good full load hours. And on the other side, if you look at power prices in Germany, they are the lowest during midday, so you're not really making money if you produce electricity at 12 o'clock in June. We have the highest electricity prices in the morning and in the evening. And this obviously is really good for us, because as soon as the sun rises, we are facing 70 degrees to the east. So we really have a quite well spread electricity generation profile. And this is good for the grid, and obviously also good for the business case of an Agri-PV plant. So this was a short overview on the technologies that we have, and then maybe my last slide is on the experience that we made with our first plant in Oberdorf am Lech, which is close to Augsburg or close to Munich in southern Bavaria. So we secured the site in April 2024. Then we talked to the municipality, because you have to do this permitting process where you have to ask the municipality if you're allowed to do it. They were super open. They thought ground-mounted PV is not a good solution, because they don't want their farmers to lose their land, but they thought Agri-PV obviously works really well for farming, and they immediately, or 2 months after, they gave us the Aufstellungsbeschluss, which is kind of the first step for permitting in Germany. We then secured the grid a few months later, and after 6 months we got our building permit, which is really incredibly fast. We got our EEG tariff in May, and obviously then reached financial closing, because without the tariff you cannot provide financing for the plant. And then we ordered all our modules and stuff, and now in July the construction starts. The experience that we made during this whole process of development were really positive. First of all, sometimes you have, for the ground-mounted PV, you usually have to find a lot of compensation areas, because you are just building, basically. For us, in our case, the people who are responsible for that told us that we are only building 2% of the area, really, with substructure. So we didn't need any compensation areas, which was really lucky for us, because this usually takes a year to find suitable compensation areas. As I said, we had a really good support from the local residents. That's why we managed to get through permitting process in 6 months. They liked it. They liked it a lot. And also, I think one of the advantages that we found that we are the most proud of is that in Germany there's the Solarpaket 1, which didn't come yet because the EU Commission has not approved it yet. So we're still working on an old scheme for Agri-PV, which is financially just not that advantageous. So we got a small subsidy because of Agri-PV, but it's not that high. And we still managed to get really good financing on the plant, and really prove that Agri-PV does not have to be some sort of game where you just like, it's a really nice idea, but everybody has to pay a little bit more, because usually we all want also cheap electricity and want to build solutions that are economically. And yeah, with the construction chart and the closed financing of our plant, we really proved that Agri-PV works just as well or even better as ground-mounted PV for farmers, for communities, for developers, and also for the investors on the other side. Yeah, this is the experience we made. We're really proud of it, and yeah, we can hope we stay in contact when construction starts. We obviously will make a lot of more value, or even more valuable experiences, and also in the years later than that. But yeah, that's how our Agri-PV is developing.
Thank you, Nils, so much for your presentation. We already have quite some questions to you that we will still wait until the Q&A starts. But I will introduce David. David, you can join us, and we will give you mouse control right now so you can start with your presentation. Do you have it now?
Yes, it looks good. Thanks, Radmila. Hi, everyone. Thanks for that, Nils. Thanks, Radmila. So I'll just walk you here through our farm, which is an agroecological farm, so you can see how we can really, let's say, combine strict ecological measures and Agri-PV with some quite good results. So I have a couple of slides presenting what we do, how we work, and then I have some video footage to walk you through and walk you around, and I'll comment the pictures as we see them. So our farm is named Lacampagne. It's about an hour from Bordeaux, 1.5 hours from Toulouse, in southern France, southwest France. And my name is David Lecoufle. I've actually worked in PV the first 20 years of my career, and then I converted to being a farmer 5 years ago. So I founded this collective farm, Lacampagne, about 4 years ago. Basically, the main principles we are following are these ones here I'm showing. We're working agroforestry with mobile chicken coops. We're following the principles of syntropic agriculture. I could come into details of that if somebody's interested later. We're also following the principles of regenerative hydrology, so we're fully conscious on the water cycle and water resource management. We use zero till and zero chemicals. We strictly use cover crops. We have no bare land, and we have integrated our farm into the surrounding protected area. And since 2 years and 1 year running, we now have our Agri-PV greenhouse, which we've designed. I'll come back to that obviously a bit later. So what we're cultivating in our farm are mainly exotic fruits. So we have 6 hectares of free field exotic fruits. So hardy and frost-resistant exotic fruits. As this one here you see, it's called Feijoa. It's from South America originally. We only do direct sales of our products, and we also process our fruits into dry fruits, jams, and all sort of processed products, which we do process at the farm. And the idea here is to really keep the whole margin to the producer, to the farm. We're also really acting as a local player concerning local food sovereignty, and really working with all the different institutional and let's say business contacts in the area. And we also do a lot of training. So for adults or young farmers starting their farms, but also for schools and preschools. And we also host a lot of woofers the whole year to come and learn at the farm. So this is the land we acquired 5 years ago. So it was bare land. Just briefly to show you how it looks like today. So we have planted on 3.5 hectares. We have planted about 3,000 trees. About 2/3 of them are forest trees, so they're non-productive trees. They're here to help biodiversity and help the overall, let's say, growth and regenerative concept. And you see here on the right side our PV greenhouse, which came, the construction started in July 2023. It was interrupted the whole winter 23-24 because of heavy rainfall. And we finalized and planted the greenhouse in July 2024. That's just about 1 year ago. So the basic principles we have in designing this greenhouse, so which I designed obviously on the let's say, taking into account the agronomic needs of the plants and the tropical fruits I'm growing below it. So we have two types of solar panels. We have on the south side, which is shown left here, we have semi-transparent bifacial modules with diffusing glass between the cells. I'll show you pictures of that afterwards. And on the north side, shown right here, so we have conventional bifacial modules. So obviously there's much more shade in the north side. So we're not cultivating the same plants in the north than in the south side. Important here to say was the, let's say, the game of the sun throughout the seasons. So what we're trying to achieve here, let's say the bioclimatic concept we have is that in the winter, the sun is low, so the plants have access to almost unshadowed sun, while also obviously having improved temperatures, so which allows the growing season to be 2 to 3 months longer towards spring and 2 to 3 months longer towards the fall. So we have a 9 months growing season, 9 to 10 months growing season, rather than 4 or 5. And we're trying to achieve the opposite in the summer. So here we have the summer solstice, looking at the top diagram, where what we're trying to achieve here is cover plants from too much sun and too much heat, especially during midday heat strokes. So the percentages you see here from left to right are the approximate access to light that the plants grown in the greenhouse have access to. So obviously what you can see is that the, let's say, the cast shadow of the full modules is behind the greenhouse during the winter. So actually most of the greenhouse in the winter has a very good sunlight rate. And in the summer, even in the most shady area at the north, we have about 50% sunlight access rate. So obviously, as I was mentioning, we're not growing the same crops, same fruits at the north end, at the south end, but we have really good results, which you'll see in a minute in my video. Here on this last slide, it's just to attract a couple of points to your attention. So here we're looking east, so the south is on the right side. So we have our semi-transparent modules on the right side. So it's a midday in November. So what we see is that the cast shadow is really at the far end on the left. We have really bright light and sunlight throughout the greenhouse. It's hard to see here if you don't know it, but there's no straight radiation. There's only diffuse radiation, which is obviously really beneficial for the plants. So now in a few minutes, I'll show the same view in the same greenhouse 6 months later. So we shot the different videos last week. So I'll comment as we go through it, and just keep in mind this picture as you will see the other pictures of the plants, how they've grown now. So we see here first, so that's an overall view of the farm. We see how the tree lines are planted along the contours. So they all represent, let's say, horizontal lines following the contours. That's part of the regenerative hydrology. What we're trying to do here is to keep as much water on the land as possible, especially during heavy rainfall. We have also dug 5 lakes, so we're fully autonomous in water. So we're basically storing winter rainfall for summer use. So we're not even connected to the mains. We're really autonomous what water usage is concerned. So these are the tree lines as seen from the ground. We can see also how the greenhouse is integrated into the landscape. It was always, at the beginning, was often let's say a query or a question if this would spoil the landscape. which I believe, and all visitors that come to our farm really reckon it fits in very well into the landscapes. The two small huts we see here are our chicken coops, our mobile chicken coops. So they're in between the trees. So these images here, they were filmed this week, so we can see the heavier shadow on the left side and the lighter diffused light shadow on the right side. So here we're growing, in particular, we're growing passion fruit, let's say the South American maracuya passion fruit type. We have bananas, we have physalis, we have all sorts of different citruses. So lemon, oranges, grapefruit. Also growing avocados and some types of guava. So obviously it's quite cold in winter in the season. In the winter season, it goes down to -5 to -10 even, and the greenhouse is unheated. So we're only using, let's say, the greenhouse effect within the greenhouse to warm the soil and to warm the atmosphere. So here you can really see in between the rows, there's a bit of more light. That's where the sunlight that falls between the panels. So this is a view in the morning, in an early morning, just to show you a bit of a different, let's say, impression of what it looks like inside. So I think we're reaching the end of my video. I was a bit faster. Obviously, I'm happy to take all your questions you may have. Maybe one last point I may raise before moving on is the economic model here is that I'm not getting any lease, but I didn't pay anything for the greenhouse. So the IPP, the independent power purchaser who built the greenhouse, did it at his own costs, and he's paying himself back with the sales of electricity for a duration of 20 years, and then I'll be the owner of the greenhouse and the roof. Strictly speaking, today I'm owner of the walls, but not of the roof. And after 20 years, I also become owner of the roof. So thanks for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thanks.
Thank you, David. I'm in love with your farm. It looks so beautiful. So
Thank you.
thank you so much for your presentation, and I will welcome Theresa on the stage. We will give you the mouse control right now. Hi.
Hello, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we do. And now you have a mouse control as well.
Yes. Perfect. So my topic today is Agri-PV in Germany, what makes it interesting, and I kind of want to obviously promote, so to my person, I'm Theresa Kärtner. I work for the German Farming Association here in Berlin. I'm a policy advisor for the topics renewable energy and social policy. And because I do the topics renewable energy, I also work on the topics Agri-PV. And I came 4 years ago to the German Farming Association, and it's been a very good time to start with the topic Agri-PV, because in the last 4 years, a lot of legislation has changed to make Agri-PV also a lot more attractive in Germany. What you can say about German agriculture is we are very fortunate to have, so if you take the entire land we have in the country, 50% of it is either agricultural land or forest. So that means a big chunk of Germany belongs to German farmers, and we obviously want to keep it that way. And Agri-PV gives us the possibility to find a way to do both. And that conflict is one thing I will also talk about. So I said about 4 years ago, I started the German Farming Association, and that was also when the now old government came into power. And what they did is they set expansion targets, especially for solar. So, and by 2030, we should have 215 gigawatt. By 2045, we should have 400 gigawatt. Right now, Germany has around 100 gigawatt already installed in Germany on solar power. So we see that in the next 5 years, basically, we have to double the amount if we want to reach these goals, which the new government has also said that they want to hold on to these goals. So that's what it's looking like so far, that we have to double the amount of PV we have right now. It is in these legislations are in the Renewable Energies Act. In Germany, we call it the EEG. And in that, it also, though, clearly states that only 50% of these expansion targets are allowed to happen on agricultural land, and 50% have to happen on rooftops or, for example, parking lots. But we can see that in total, we're going up. We are really invested in the renewable energies and want to further this. What that does mean for the farmers is that we are right now calculating with at least 100,000 hectares additionally of land that will be lost by 2030. So that is a lot, and especially for farmers that are relying on that land, that can be putting them to the point that if they lose that amount of land, it will no longer make sense for them to have their farm. So we see we have this kind of conflict of interest. We have on one side, we do want to become dependent on ourselves for energy. We no longer want to have dependencies, but at the same time, we also don't want to create new dependencies when it comes to food security. So that is one big conflict we have. And then also when we're looking at Agri-PV, you also have to look at the financial conflict of interest. A PV plant brings a lot more money than an agricultural field. If we're talking about the averages, right? Like an average wheat field will bring less than what a farmer will get if an investor comes to them for a ground-mounted PV plant. You can roundabout say that the land lease for that the farmer will get for a ground-mounted PV plant will be starting at $3,000, going up to or over $5,000 per hectare. And in Germany, a land lease for an arable farmland on average is around 300 euros per hectare. So there you can already see this huge amount of imbalance that we also have when we're talking about Agri-PV. So now we're looking at Agri-PV. It could be a solution to kind of not make it an either or situation, but an and, right? That's our main goal when we're talking about Agri-PV, is that we're saying it doesn't have to be an either or, it can be an and. And because conflict of land use is a huge topic, we as German Farming Association pretty early on started working with what we think is an Agri-PV and how that could work for Germany. So we do have just as a farming association, positions, and our position in general when it comes to renewable energies is that we still continue to say that rooftop PV must be priority when we're talking about PV expansion. Just because we have a huge area in Germany that's already taken from agriculture that is used for buildings, and that it makes sense to give these a dual use. Then our second thing is that agricultural land, and especially very fertile agricultural land, must be protected. It is a finite resource. As I said before, we don't want to get rid of one dependency and create another when it comes, for example, to food security. And that's why it's very important for us that we protect the really good agricultural land and really make sure that it's still able to be farmed. Then the next thing is, and this is particularly also to Agri-PV, is that we say the regulations and the funding must be clear. So we do have this problem. We just heard in the very first slides of this webinar, we already heard about some of the regulations that are in Germany that make it attractive, which I will also get to. And all of these regulations came at a very fast pace, which is good, right? We wanted to really get something moving forward, but what happens if you push legislation very fast is you also find a lot of loopholes and like gray zones where it's not quite sure. And that is always something where we're very careful about, because we want to make sure that our farmers, when they invest, farmers think in multiple generations. And so we want to make sure that these are concepts that won't just last 2 or 5 years and then they will get problems. We want to make sure that this is really something that kind of can withstand time. and also changing regulations. So we want clear regulations, we want funding, and especially for smaller agri-PV projects, we want to receive extra funding, because for us, small agri-PV projects, that's what a farmer, if they're going to invest in agri-PV, that they can handle. If you're going to invest in a new stable for pigs or for cows, you're also round about an investment of $1 to $3 million. That's something, if you're talking about a small agri-PV plant that's maybe also close to their farm, to do self-sufficiency, but also to put it into the grid, that is something farmers can handle. But an honest discussion is that agri-PV projects, due to the fact that they, for example, are higher up, need more metal, maybe are more difficult in planning, also are more expensive than a regular ground-mounted PV plant. We think this money is well invested because we manage this dual use, but especially small agri-PV projects definitely need funding to make sure that that is possible. So now we'll continue. Exactly. So we already heard about it today, Agri-PV in German law. All of these changes really came in the last 4 years. And it started actually with the third one in the row, the GAP-Direktzahlungsverordnung, which many maybe will know under the CAP. So this is money that's coming from the EU. This is very special to Germany. What the CAP is like a general regulation that comes from the EU, and then each nation can also kind of fine-tune it to fit the needs that they have. And one fine-tuning that Germany did is at first in 2023, they said, okay, 85% of the CAP payments can be kept by the farmer if he does agri-PV. This law has actually even gotten changed. I think, last year got changed. So it went into effect this year, that if you can justify that only like how much percent of your land is used for that isn't farmable. So we're talking about where the metal is in the ground, where you just can't plant anything. Then you can minus that percentage, you get that much. So if I can prove I only lost 5% of my land for the mounting of my agri-PV, then I can keep 95% of the CAP funding. This is a big thing for farmers. I think also because it has something to do with identity. You kind of want to keep your land in that farming aspect. So I think this is also important financially, but also very important just as a whole for the farmers to make sure that their land is still also seen by the government as farm land. The next change that kind of came was in the Renewable Energies Act. I said it before, EEG 2023, and that's where they said that you could build agri-PV plants and get special funding for it. And so the funding back then was you got 1 to 2 cents more on top. That funding has kind of changed through the Solarpaket. That was also talked about, but sadly the Solarpaket has not been ratified by allowed by the gotten its stamp of approval by the EU. So we're still waiting on that. Then the next thing that changed, and this is why I was also talking about funding for smaller agri-PV plants, is that in Germany it came into our building laws or building code that if it's a farmer has land close by near his farm that he up to 2.5 hectares, he can put agri-PV on it without getting a special building permit, which is very special because in Germany, if you want to build outside of the living area, it's very hard to build things. And so this really is something that's just special for farmers, definitely will make it financially more attractive and you also lose less time. So we've seen a big attractiveness to this change in law. And then the last thing, and probably the biggest thing that changed, was in our tax. German farmers are very privileged, rightly so, that they don't have to pay full inheritance tax, because if that wasn't so, it would basically be financially impossible to give the farm to the next generation. And right now, it's if you have a ground-mounted PV plant, like a conventional PV plant, those areas get taken out of that tax privilege and are just taxed like every normal area of land in Germany. And that makes it very expensive. So basically what you're doing is if a farmer is investing in renewable energies, you're giving the costs of that investment onto the next generation through the inheritance laws. And in this tax paper, it was basically changed and said if it's an agri-PV plant, and this is very special, it has to follow the rules of the DIN Spec 99434, which is a norm that was created in 2021 very important if you're going into the German market with Agri-PV. It has to follow this norm, and if it does, then it is still in the bracket of agricultural land. Yes, so that is something very big and something very special for the Agri-PV. I can also take questions on that later. Important is for anyone looking into the German market, especially, is just to look at this Dienstspec 91434, because it's if you can see in these laws, it's everywhere, it's stated, and so if your concept doesn't follow these plans, it basically is irrelevant in Germany, I would say. So just to sum it up, what do we need, or what do yes, also the farmers need in Germany to also want to invest in Agri-PV? I think that's also a very important topic, is we need clarity and certainty when it comes to our regulations. We need a standardized definition of Agri-PV. That's something that we're working on right now, just to really clarify what do we see as an Agri-PV and what do we not see. And that's very important to also make sure we don't have projects that are stating that they are Agri-PV and they're just really workaround for a normal ground-mounted PV to maybe gain some of the benefits that I just talked about. To do that, we need practical control mechanisms that work for farmers, that don't add more bureaucracy. And then for all of that, of course, our goal is to protect agricultural land, especially now, what we sadly have been seeing in the past year, also from fake Agri-PV projects that won't really have the intent of creating that dual use, but more have the intent of maybe working around laws to get all the goodies of an Agri-PV, but at the end, basically are a ground-mounted PV plant. Yes, so that's it. I try to stay in that time frame. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you, Theresa, so much for your presentation. And I think, yeah, thank you everyone for your presentations. I think they've been very insightful. We have quite a lot of questions. Therefore, I think let's move on to the Q&A. I will ask all of you to put also your cameras, the speakers, please. And then I have the first question to Nils, to you. So the question is, why is the elevated cow system cheaper than the elevated crop system? Shouldn't the elevated cow system be more expensive because it is more stable?
Yes, I think that's probably one intuitive way to argument. But the thing is a little that usually the permanent crop plants are not that big. You don't have like 50-hectare farms of that. It's usually really small, and you really can't scale costs that much as you can do with a big farm. That's, I think, the first point. And the other point is that that you install, that we also saw in the presentation of David, that you install modules that are quite how you say, not a stance. So it's only like, it's not a stance. So let's say that the cost that you have per substructure compared to modules is quite high. You have to install way more substructure than for a cow PV plant. And this also, together with the first point, makes it in the end more expensive than cow PV. The cow PV substructure is basically just ground-mounted substructure, which is a meter higher than the ground-mounted ones.
Okay, there is also another question, I think, to you. Isn't the row spacing huge when using such large agricultural machinery?
It depends. I like in our project in Oberndorf, we have row distances of 14 meters. I think if you talk to ecological farmer, usually they say it's big. If you talk to a conventional farmer, they say it's super small because they have really wide machineries. I think it's really good for I think it's a good compromise for farming and also for the usage of electricity generation. And also, I mean, we have those 14-meter wide row distances, but in the end, our modules, because we're using 2 modules on the length, are almost 4.7 meters wide. So they're also like each row is really wide, which makes the difference a bit better for us, or in terms of electricity installable capacity per hectare.
Okay, well, makes sense. Onto to you, David. We have a question. If you're looking to expand or replicate your Agri-PV system in some way, for example, additional greenhouses or different areas?
So at the moment, I don't have the space on my farm, but indeed, seeing the results that we have, which are really beyond my expectations, I really think the model is replicable to larger areas, probably 1 hectares or even a few hectares. And in any case, there's a lot of, let's say, interest in fellow farmers in the area and beyond in the results we're bringing here. So it's looking good, yes.
Also, you've seen a lot of interest from your colleague farmers to set up the similar systems?
Yeah, actually, I thought at the beginning there would be, let's say, some apprehension of the combination of ecology and agri-PV. But actually, I'm seeing really the opposite. There's a lot of interest, and there's a lot of even curiosity, I could call it sometime. But in any case, it's raising a lot of interest around. Even, for instance, the agricultural chamber came to see what we're doing and how it works. So in any case, I'm hoping we're spreading some ideas and some seeds to further develop that. Yes.
Okay, well, interesting. I think I have now another question for Theresa. Does feed-in tariff and direct marketing both exist in Germany for Agri-PV, plan up to 1 megawatt? Yeah, the person noticed that new rules more than 100 kilowatt per DM is mandatory. Does it apply also for Agri-PV?
I'm not sure if I understood your question correctly, but what is possible is if you, well, I'm talking about now about the solar Paket, so Solarpaket 1, which hasn't been gone or hasn't been approved by the EU. You can, if you're under 1 megawatt, you go directly, you get the, for example, right now, the highest, it's like a bidding system in Germany, and the highest your bid can be is like, if this law gets really passed, would be 9.5 cents per kilowatt. So you then don't have to go into bidding if you're under 1 megawatt. You would automatically get the highest, the 9.5 cents.
Okay.
But if you're over the 1 megawatt, then you do have to go into the bidding, and it's not clear what you would come up with.
Okay. We have another question, I think maybe close to the same topic. Does direct marketeer shut down Agri-PV during negative hours? And if not, how much per kilowatt owner need to pay as a cost?
Okay. If it's with these new laws, it is if you have negative prices, you definitely don't get. If really depends when if you're right now building one and then it goes into the grid. I'm saying this year and into the Renewable Energies Act, then you won't get money. The money that you get from the government, the certain amount, you will no longer get paid for those hours with negative prices.
Okay. I think we got another question to Nils about the comparison of the respective, and now I'm, yeah, this is an abbreviation, LCOEs and CAPX.
CAPX.
Yeah,
Cabbage. So LCOE, I mean, really dependent on the technology of Agri-PV technology. Just now talking for trackers because that we are building. LCOE are a little bit higher because you have also higher capex, but in the end, because of those 20 to 30% exit generation that you make. Those larger LCOEs are not doable. Let's say like that. Capex are also higher. For a tracker, you can say around 15 to 20% for the whole plant, or at least until the fence is higher than for a ground-mounted PV plant.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, maybe the question to David, I'm not sure, but what are the main cost components and payback periods for adding Agri-PV to your agricultural operations? Would that be a question you can answer?
I don't think I can answer that one. Maybe Nils, rather, right?
Maybe, Nils?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yes, of course. So what are the main cost components and paybacks periods for adding Agri-PV to your agricultural operations?
Obviously, a difficult question, really dependent on the size of the Agri-PV plant. If we are talking about, let's say, a small plant, those which are privileged below 2.5 hectares, you have payback periods, again, super dependent also on the location, if you're close to the Alps, so in the very south or at the north coast. But around 10 years, a little bit higher if you're in the north, a little bit better or shorter than when you're in the south. And I'm talking about a payback period in case you only finance it with equity. If you're talking about large plants, you working well, you have return on equity usually around payback of the on equity around 5 years, something like this. But again, really dependent on interest rates, location. Yeah.
I think it was more generic question. And I think another generic question, how much land can typically be used for agricultural production alongside solar modules in Germany?
At least 85%. I mean, this is what also Theresa has said. We have the stints back, which is really, let's say, very strict. You find it everywhere. And we are not allowed, or as a solar developer, we are not allowed to use more land than 15% of the area. So at least 85% have to stay in the agricultural production.
All right. I think if the audience have one more question, you can please put it there yet. For now, I will ask just the question from myself, more like before we wrap up. What's the one thing you wish our audience would take away from today's webinar, from each of you?
From my end, I think the most important takeaway is that Agri-PV, especially in Germany, is really competitive against ground-mounted or conventional PV, and we are really confident that it will replace step by step conventional PV because it's just a better solution for basically everybody.
Okay. What do you think, David?
To me, I think, as I'm trying to show in.
Oh, sorry,
can you hear me? Yeah, sorry about that. I think in countries with more radiation, such as France or Spain, Italy, and so on, I think you can definitely see Agri-PV as an asset, allowing you to cultivate differently or even cultivate better things you would normally not be able to do. So the shadow is not necessarily, let's say, a barrier, but it can actually be an asset to help you thrive your plants.
Okay. And Theresa?
I think that's an important point to also say if we're looking at climate change. For example, the real benefit of Agri-PV, which is maybe also crop protection or animal protection, it will still come in the future. And maybe that is my biggest kind of, what I want to leave with take-home message is for investors to work together with farmers, to see them really as a person to communicate with. They know what's best for their soil, for their ground, what is doable in that region, and to not just see it as an investment opportunity for themselves, but really for together with the farmer and see him as a partner and to have that eye level exchange. I think those are also the projects that I'm seeing that are the best projects out there that really have that, what David also was saying, to have that in mind, maybe also what is to come. And I think that's maybe something where both sides, I always like to say the PV sector is very fast. Sometimes it feels like, there's a startup starting every second with another solar solution. And I think maybe that's where the solar can learn from farmers who really think in generations and not just in a 2 or 5 year plan, and to see what maybe Agri-PV can also just become in the future and work towards that to really create something long lasting and not just out of a bubble.
Well, thank you so much. I think it was really nice and relevant to our audience. I see we don't have any more time, so I will close the Q&A on this point. Before we go, I also wanted to say to our audience that we just launched the summer deal, and it basically grants you a 15% discount for our events up until October, and it's valid from 12th of June until 11th of July. So book a ticket for of the conference for your interest. And yeah, to our speakers, thank you so much for joining and sharing your knowledge. It's been really nice, and I think we got good feedback from our audience as well. Yeah, I hope we're gonna see each other soon, and yeah, have a wonderful rest of your day.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Thank you for the attention.